When a marriage ends, a couple may turn to the law to resolve disputes about their children. But almost immediately, they're sucked into an antiquated, secret family justice system, where the dispute is inflamed further because of the adversarial nature of our law, which promotes discord, bitterness, rage, anger, and finally, hatred. It's a farce. The law claims to be gender neutral, but that's a lie. For 9 times out of 10, the judge's decision will favour the mother. If they're lucky, dads, like a visiting uncle from Mars, will see their kids for contact every other weekend. So why does this happen? Why are fathers forcibly removed from their children? Why do we allow this, in effect, state-sanctioned kidnapping? The root of the problem facing fathers lies with one crucial phrase written into the law itself. The first line of the 1989 Children Act states that the best interests of the child are to be considered paramount. Now, this sounds fair enough, but in reality it's through this that a bias against the idea of men in the home has penetrated the family courts. The Children's Act states that the interests of the children will be served by this law, because it's called the Children's Act. For me, the problem is that the unspoken and indeed unwritten corollary of that clear statement is that the interests of the child are nearly always best served by the presence of the mother. Why are the courts so resistant to the fact that men are as capable at bringing up their children as a woman?
Well, I find that very difficult to deal with. I think probably in many cases it's happened because the courts have tended to equate young children with mothers for some reason.
Well, that's a cultural, isn't it? A social thing.
Yes,
for another time.
Probably, yes.
So no one is accountable for this reactionary, unfair, unjust, possibly illegal, and certainly illogical system which causes so much destruction. How can this be?
While society is changing, what is still the fact is that women take the prime responsibility for caring and bringing up their child, and that's still, you can see that in the patterns of work, you can see that in who's at the school gates picking up the children, you can see that in who takes the children to the doctors, who takes the children to the dentist. When it comes to separation and divorce and determining the residence for a child, interesting enough, if you actually look at the stats, you'll probably dispute this one, but the reality is that women on the whole, more women tend to apply for residence orders, more men tend to apply for contact orders.
But if a man does want to fight for the right to be a parent, he'll face a bigger, more practical problem. By the time a case gets to court, most fathers will have left the family home for which he is still paying and be lucky to afford a bedsit or shared flat. By moving out, a father is in fact often sowing the seeds of his own downfall. Letting the children live alone with their mother will very quickly establish a living arrangement that the courts are reluctant to break up.
When you're in a conflict situation and a judge has to determine the residence of the child, the judge, in looking at the interest of the child, would look for stability. So if the child is already living with a mum...
What's his idea of stability?
Well, if the child is already living with a mum, the judge may well decide that that's in the best interest of the child to continue.
But that's
wrong. Well, that may be your view.
No,
now, how do we tackle that?
View.
Hang on. How do we tackle that? By speeding up the court processes and by trying to get mediation and conciliation in at an earlier stage.
But why has this clearly failed, decrepit system been allowed to continue for so long, reinforcing the worst prejudices and injustices? It currently takes so long for cases to reach court that judges are even more unwilling to upset the living patterns, which is almost always that the child will be living with its mother. The status quo almost always happens simply because of the delay in getting to court.
Yes.
So the court itself imposes a status quo. So it's catch-22.
This is one of the criticisms that judges have of the system. Delay. And it is outrageous. And it takes a year, sometimes longer, for the case to come before the court. Now, that is wrong. I mean, take, for example, the requirement to have a welfare officer's report. The government target is 12 weeks. Now that's 3 months before you get a report. In fact, it seldom takes 3 months. It usually takes 4 or 5 months. Can you just think? 20 weeks waiting for a report.
Once you've set foot outside that former family home, suddenly rights close like doors behind you, and what you thought was a sensible or reasonable or fair move for the children suddenly becomes something that is just pushing you further and further and further.
Going through this secret criminalising system is a violent, frightening experience for all concerned. Men are left feeling worthless, belittled, impoverished and embittered. And despite the exhortations of the law, the interests of the child are usually forgotten by the system in the heat of a state-engendered hatred.
Nobody's explained this one to me. We're supposed to be acting in the child's best interest, yet we spend tens of thousands of pounds. We inevitably wind up selling the family home to pay legal fees, to fight it out in court over the children. How is that in the child's best interest? Who wins? Does mum win? No. Does dad win? No.
That's a very strong
Does a
point.
child win? No. Who wins? There's only one type of person wins. That's the legal.
That's a consequence. Why does that happen? It's a consequence of having an unclear law.
What judges decide in 93% of all cases that come before them is that the children should live with mum and see dad in a few hours of state-sanctioned time on prescribed days, as though they were an occasional visiting uncle made strange by distance and uncomfortable by unfamiliarity. What happened to me was that not only is the time not enough, but that time is you're controlling the knowledge that they are going away from you in 30 seconds, 29, 25, 26. It's not that, wow, I've got an hour with them. It's that I've only got an hour left.
Got the hour.
And it's the dripping, the slow, corrosive drip of state-appointed time.
And it's the fixed time as well that's really upsetting. One father lived just one street away from the mother, and he saw the mother walking down the street with this little girl, and so she ran to him saying, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," and the mother literally pulled the child away from her father in the middle of the street. And that's happened on a number of occasions. Clients tell me this is what's happened, and this with the child so traumatised, it's just almost being dragged away from their father, and literally because it's like it's not your contact time.
You go to cafes and you look across and you see the man sitting there in the corner with the 2 kids in the Wimpy bar or whatever, and you can just tell that that's that poor sod who's seeing his kids for the weekend, and he's got to take them out somewhere and he's got to make them happy. And that is the trouble when you're in that situation. You're trying so hard to make them happy that it often doesn't work. You know, you just having the kids and trying to make them happy and trying to give them all the things to do. Sometimes they just want to sit and watch the telly.
They and I hate having to cram 2 weeks worth of time into one weekend. I'm absolutely exhausted at the end of it.
In many cases, this so-called contact, this disgraceful notion and impertinent language of access between father and child will not involve an overnight stay. After their day out with dad, he's expected to get the children back to the mother's home in time for dinner. The terror of being that 5 minutes late can often mean a lawyer's letter chastising your parenting and threatening further withdrawal of your child. Not only is this heartbreaking, but more importantly, it causes immediate, long-term psychological damage to their children.
The evening rituals are really very important emotionally, and being able to participate in getting the child bathed and reading them stories and snuggling them to sleep in bed. But those are really precious moments for a parent and for a child. They're part of the crucial glue that keeps those relationships going. And if you cut a parent out of those really precious moments, you diminish the opportunities to have a rich, deep, warm relationship.
This is the thing specifically that almost drove me I mean, properly insane. I mean, the smell of my children in the house, you know, tucking them up, going in to just make sure they're all right, kissing them goodnight, bathing, the bedtime story, the cuddles, the hot chocolate. I mean, that really almost drove me insane, that had just gone like that.
Easter, I remember him staying overnight, and for the first time I tucked him into bed, and this, that, and it was pitiful, really. It really was. I had nothing, and I tucked him into bed, and they went off to sleep, and I just sat there and watched them all night. I just watched them sleep. You know, I hadn't seen this for 6 months. I hadn't been in this part of their life for 6 months. You know, tucking them up into bed and sleep. I mean, my son was 10 by then, but my daughter was only 6. And it was, I just remember sitting there in this squalid little bedsit, looking at them and thinking, you know, wow.
The whole issue of how much contact fathers have with their children is bound up with this issue of their intimacy with the children and their keeping in touch as the children grow up. We've looked at a very large sample of families, around 10,000 families, in which we looked at mothers' reports of how well their children were doing after separation. And essentially the story was exactly the same, that the children who saw more of their fathers, who had frequent and regular contact with their fathers, who felt close and involved with their fathers, were doing much better in terms of adjustment. I mean, there's a completely clear, unequivocal pattern of results. So it's in everybody's interest, I think, for fathers to be being a parent, even if they're on their own.
What's important is the continuation of the relationship and preserving that stability.
So if that is the norm for those children, moving between their dads, they're home with their dad, they're home with their mum, that is as stable psychologically for them as any other domestic device.
Well, and it doesn't have to have been the norm for the children. What's important is that the norm was that they had relationships with both parents. And it's preserving those relationships that's important. And I would argue that that's an issue of children's rights.
The more family that a child's got in their lives, the more family they see, and the more you tell that child, oh, you're wonderful, what a beautiful girl, what a handsome little boy, how clever you are, you're going to be top of the class. The more you tell a child that, they will grow and have confidence and they'll feel stable and they'll grow up being a better person for that.
The harm that this outdated, defunct family law causes to children, their fathers, and the extended families cannot be underestimated. Fractured families, scarred children, distraught grandparents. What have we become? We allowed this system to continue when we know the damage that it's doing. It breaks our hearts, destroys our children, it's ruinous for society, it makes the culture vulgar and perverse. It costs a fortune, and it flies in the face of everything we know as humans, that children love both of their parents, and in turn, both of their parents love them.
Life is empty and quiet. And all those times when you go, God, just give me an afternoon breathing space, which most parents know. I actually long for the mess and the chaos and all the things that go with it.